Right. Well, so Francis, it's so lovely to see you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so sorry to not be able to join you in person. As Francis said, I had a family obligation that made me have to stay home. But I do hope to be able to join you for a future forum. And what I can say is, looking at the agenda and just the amazing lineup of participants, I am truly missing you all and wishing that I was there. The discussion, it looks like, that you've been having over the last couple of days just is so important. You've been looking at some of the big picture interconnections between land, energy, water. You've been exploring what the impact of water on certain industries like agriculture, data centers, textiles. I know you've been digging in on the role of technology to drive transformation in the sector, and also looked at very diverse case studies from places like Singapore and Spain. So I know it's been a wonderful couple of days, and I feel like at an absolute disadvantage, sort of zooming in at the very end of what I know has been a rich discussion. But let me offer a couple of thoughts. As Francis mentioned, I myself am in a transition right now, and so I find myself in sort of a moment of deep introspection and reflection, both on sort of the work that I've been able to do to advance sustainable water management and kind of what the future holds. And Francis and I thought sort of actually offering a couple of more personal reflections might help as you sort of pull together the threads that you've been exploring over the last couple of days and in these last few hours that you have together. So, when I think about my journey in water, it has been one where I've tried to approach the big picture problems that we're facing in the sector from a couple of different vantage points. So I started my career in water actually working at a local water utility, the San Francisco Water Utility, where, each and every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we were really focused on making sure that we could provide clean and safe water to 2.6 million people in the Bay Area, as well as to fuel the huge economy of the region with water resources. So I really understand firsthand that a local municipal leader, the constant trade-offs, the constant challenge of really trying to allocate insufficient resources in the face of mounting challenges, right? I then worked at the U.S. Water Alliance, as Francis mentioned, where really the whole goal of the alliance was to find uncommon common ground solutions to some of the hardest issues in at least here in the United States, the battle between water for fish versus farms, for agriculture versus cities, how to, as a nation, manage through a huge crisis like the Flint water crisis and what that meant for issues of things like race and poverty in this country. That sort of led me to, as Francis mentioned, serve as the assistant administrator. I was appointed by President Biden on day one in that role and confirmed by the Senate a few months later. And I have to say, the last 3 years, managing America's water program through, I think, the biggest crisis that we have faced as a nation, but also, I think, a moment of real transformation. I think some of what we've achieved in the last 3 years, I think, will pay dividends for several decades. If I think about, my first day on the job as the assistant administrator, think about where we were as a planet really 3 years ago. We had an economy, a world that was essentially shut down because of the COVID pandemic. We had an economy that was, essentially in free fall. Here in the United States, a democracy at risk. I stepped into the role just, 2 weeks after the January 6th insurrection. And we were also at a moment where we were actually not only focused on water, but actually rebuilding the public institutions that manage water, including the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's been a remarkable 3 years in this country, certainly on water resources. We secured a $50 billion appropriation for water, historic, first ever in this country. And that's going to really lead to kind of a decade of investment in local water infrastructure projects, and really a decade of, I think, robust economic activity because of that, as well as rebuilding and putting in place future regulations to protect water quality. First ever PFAS drinking water regulation, strengthening of things like the lead and copper rule. So a huge amount of progress that we've, I think, made over the last 3 years. But now I step into this role where I'm both advising Xylem, a Fortune 500 company, working with philanthropy like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, who are thinking about what is philanthropy's role, working with national nonprofit policy links. So I now find myself really thinking about this issue of a water secure world from the public sector, the private sector, as well as the nonprofit civil society sector. And I find myself really thinking about, if we're going to really become a water secure world, we all need to think about how we bridge and really build across these sectors that are all tackling this issue from very different ways. And so just as sort of you're closing out your time together, I want to sort of offer 2 ideas, and hopefully, Francis, this will help spark some ongoing and useful conversation for those in the room. So one is, I think that for those of us working in water, we need to get more strategic in understanding and acting on the global megatrends that are really fundamentally shaping how we live, work, play, and connect with one another. So often when we have conversations about, the future of water, we very quickly get into the technical data about water itself, right? Too much, too little, poor quality. But I think we need to, as a sector, really zoom out and understand what is a very, very complicated and dizzying array of forces and really sense make all of that together. When I think about it, there's 5 trends that I'm really focused on thinking about and understanding how to position the interventions in water around. So those 5 trends are, of course, rapid urbanization. 2/3 of the world's population will reside in cities by 2050. That's double the number of people that were living in cities compared to 1950. So what is that mass migration going to mean as far as new business models, new infrastructure, how we manage our water resources, our very limited water resources? I think the second big mega trend that we really need to grapple with is the rapid demographic and social change that's happening really across countries everywhere. Certainly one of those is around longer lifespans and modern lifestyles that are going to fundamentally change things like medicine and consumer habits, which then, right, impact water resource management. Another huge megatrend that we need to be paying attention to is this sort of chaotic forces that are pulling away from each other. We both are at a time where our world is growing more unequal. We have growing income inequality, but we also have emerging global wealth. So, for example, we know that new affluent customers are going to be expanding in Asia and across emerging markets. 6 out of the 7 largest economies by 2050 will be in emerging markets at the same time that we have growing poverty and income inequality. How do we square those two? What are those sort of pulling apart trends mean for water management moving forward? Of course, I know you've talked a lot about climate and resource scarcity, so I won't go into that. And then finally, I think we are at a moment of a huge technology super cycle. There's 3 big forces: artificial intelligence, biotechnology, biomedicine, and this movement towards wearable devices. All of these things are shaking up our economy, shaking up our society, shaking up how we connect to one another. And I think we've only scratched the surface of understanding what that means for water. So I think, I challenge all of us to think about not only the trends, the data, the technical information that we have about the water sector, but how these big forces, these big mega trends shape the landscape of opportunity and possibility for us in the sector. I think the second point that I wanted to offer you all is, and again, I come to this having sat in these different seats, right? It is time for a radical alignment across sectors if we really are going to become a water secure world. I will say we continue to slice and dice water, right? But at the end of the day, the energy crisis is the food crisis, is the water crisis, it's the climate crisis. We're all trying to solve for the same thing. Yet we still work in our stovepipes and silos, and we have excellence, right? We have excellent innovation, excellent solutions in our stovepipes, in our silos. But that is not going to get us to solve this issue fundamentally, right? We need to not only see the synergies that exist in water, but we need to live into them. We need to breathe into them. We really need to execute on those synergies. And that is going to take a radical alignment across the public, the private, nonprofit sectors, and philanthropic sectors in a way that we have not done yet. So let us all bridge and boundary cross together. Hopefully that was helpful, Francis, and I'll kind of turn it back to you.
First question to you, and I know you know a number of people in the room.
Hi, sorry, thank you for getting my mic here because I was just talking to a camera over there. We have a number, we're very grateful for that. And I know we have a number of people in the room here whom you know, and I'm missing you too. You mentioned the private sector as you were talking, and I would love it if you could tell us a little more detail what role you think the private sector should play going ahead.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that, of course, the private sector, right, is not a behemoth kind of entity, right? There's a role for the private sector in lots of different ways. So I think a couple of things that, we're seeing, and I think we really need to hold on to and push forward is the growing presence of thinking about water risk and water opportunity in corporate boardrooms. So I think we need to continue that. Discussions, I feel like there's a maturation of discussions when you talk to institutional investors, when you think about Wall Street, how frankly, a lot of these equity analysis firms, right, that are sort of doing market shaping activities, they are actually building their muscle and capacity to understand water risk and rewards. I think that's something that we need to continue to think about. I think the other thing, and having sat having served as America's water chief, right, and worked with public agencies all around the country, there is no way that the public sector is going to solve for this alone, right? There are far too many constraints, far too many barriers to innovation, and frankly, the money that we have, even though we right now have $50 billion of bipartisan infrastructure law money, coupled with another $100 billion for related investments through the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's here just in the United States. Those dollars are so constrained in terms of what they can be used for. The capacity to innovate, the expertise of the private sector, we need that far, far more in water. I think also thinking about the water footprint alongside the energy footprint as these big sort of shifts are happening in our industrial policy is a huge role for the private sector. And it's why I'm so thrilled to be working with Xylem, who is in, I think 150 countries doing this work. And I know Jaime, I think, is in the room. You all are so small, I can't tell, but very excited also for the partnership with Radhika and Jaime as we move some of these issues forward.
I'd love to open it up to questions around the room, if anybody. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, I do agree with all the statements you made, but and this is something that comes to my mind quite often. These type of issues, so breaking silos, political will, engagement and behavior change, private sector involvement. We've been talking about this during the last 25 years, about sustainability, climate change. What can make the difference? How can we catalyze that all those factors that we've been talking about during the last 25 years could become a reality? And well, the water sector is that cross-cutting sector in which this could be possible, but But well, this has been in the narrative for so long, but it hasn't been possible. How to catalyze it?
Yeah, no, that is the absolute heart of the question. So I think there's a couple of things, right? One is we are hitting a crisis point around the management of water. At the same time that we're seeing a huge infusion and investment in water. So I feel like there's something that's starting to shift in the consciousness, right? And maybe that's a shift in consciousness that's driven by desperate need, but I think we need to grab onto that and use that as sort of an opportunity to propel this. I mean, the one thing that I will say, because you're right, like everything I've said, we've been saying for decades in the water sector, what's going to solve it? I actually think that part of what needs to happen is personal work, and that we all as leaders in the water sector need to reconnect back to the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing, and really challenge ourselves to forge relationships and connections in a way that we haven't, right? Because in some ways, the challenge of water is really a challenge. It's a problem of a tragedy of the commons, which we've all talked about for decades, right? But in order for fundamental change to happen, I do think it's going to have to start individually with all of us. And some of that sort of soul work and introspection work that allows us to show up differently and to show up as systems leaders, right? And to show up in an allied way with others that might not be the ones that we're normally, working with each and every day.
Another question from Glenn Diger.
Hi, Radhika. How are you?
Good. I can't see who that is, though.
Glenn Diger.
Oh, hi, Glenn.
So I'm going to ask a question from a little bit different perspective. So, we all try to make the world better by being smart. I have a philosophy that if we'd stop doing some of the dumb things, that we would get better. So if you could pick one or two dumb things that we should stop doing that would make things better, what would they be?
Oh my gosh, we do so many dumb things. When we think about water, can I only pick two?
So there's plenty to choose from.
Right, there are plenty to choose from. Well, I will, since I am currently a recovering assistant administrator of water, let me pick two things from the perspective of the federal government, right? So, one of my biggest kind of successes, one of the things that was sort of things that 50 years from now I'm going to be so proud of, right, was I was the lead negotiator for the $50 billion in funding that President Biden was able to win for the water sector, right? Single largest investment that the United States has ever made in water infrastructure, right? So huge win. But you know what, Glenn? We did not condition those resources that are flowing on actually doing the right things, right? We did not condition, and we tried to, but we couldn't get it through the political system, right? So we did not condition that you can't spend that money building things in the same usual ways, right? That you actually have to think about climate resilient water infrastructure and how we use those monies. We didn't say, you can't build those in flood, you can't, invest those dollars in truly flood prone areas, right? We didn't say, you've got to actually invest in ways that are incorporating the latest technology and data so that, we're making the best in decisions, right? So yes, we won a huge historic $50 billion investment, but we didn't condition that people have to act and use those resources differently. So we're not going to get as big of a transformation as if we had done that. And certainly, there's a lot of investment happening in water in Europe and other places. Same thing. We're not conditioning different behaviors, even as we're putting big money on the table. So I think that's one thing. I think the I would say the biggest dumb thing that we're doing is we are not centering the least among us truly in how we're managing our water infrastructure. I mean, Francis actually started this discussion talking about some of the communities who are hit first and worst by water-related challenges. And, you know, how many more Flint water crises, how many more, you know, Jackson, Mississippi. I'm, of course, talking in the United States, but you all can extrapolate to these communities, Sierra Leone, like, until we actually center our water management decisions on those who are the most vulnerable, we're not going to be able to solve for a water secure world for everyone. So those are my top two, Glenn. But you know, I could keep the list of dumb things going. Maybe that'll be a fun LinkedIn post that you can do that we can all pile on to.
The dumb things. Okay. Any more questions, smart or dumb? So I actually have another one for you, Radhika, and that's about wearing these different hats and the different insights you get from your experience across all these different sectors. And I mean, obviously your job at the EPA must have felt very powerful on one level, but where do you feel, and you've left, where do you feel you can exert influence, and how do you feel you can exert influence going ahead?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of a personal question too, which I appreciate, Francis. So, I mean, what I see right now in the kind of ecosystem of amazing, amazing people who are working on water, climate, energy, like this sort of suite of issues that you all have been talking about, is there's a lot of innovation happening in these different silos. There's a lot of passion and commitment to make the planet a better place. And the reality, though, is people are still not speaking the same language. You know, I am working with a nonprofit organization that's working very deeply on how do we rebuild democracy in the United States and thriving public institutions, and water and climate and energy are certainly a part of that. But how they think, who they operate with, their whole worldview is quite different than Xylem, who's a Fortune 500 company, and philanthropy has a role to play. So I think that you know, one of the things, and I don't know exactly all of the ways to do it, but building those bridges, figuring out how we find shared language and shared purpose in all of this. Otherwise, I think we're going to have a number of beautiful interventions happening all at once, but that it won't have been a 1 + 1 = 5, because we haven't done it together. So that is my work. That's my commitment moving forward, is to try to knit together a tapestry of innovation that's happening across these sectors. Because I think that, and I don't know what that exactly looks like, but I think that's where we get to the systemic sustainable change that I think we all know we need.
Thank you. I'm looking around, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and for sharing your expertise, and good luck in your next endeavors, because we're relying on people like you to take us to the next step. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all of the amazing leaders who I have learned from that are in that room. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.